Homesteading family. Now, we've been talking about using fat on the homestead and producing your own fat. Today, I have some pork back fat that we're going to work with. Now, this is not rendered. So if you end up with some pork back fat and you want to be able to cook with it, but you haven't rendered it yet, did you know there is a way to do that? It's called cooking with Fatback. And yes, I didn't just mess that up. It's actually called cooking with Fatback, even though it's the back fat we're cooking with. So when you see old recipes referring to Fatback, it is just the unrendered back fat of a pig. Now, this piece right here is still pretty frozen. I just pulled this out of the freezer not that long ago, and there's a reason for that, and that is it is much easier to cut once you have this frozen than it is when it is soft and at room temperature. When it's soft and at room temperature, it just kind of mushes, even with the sharpest knife. So keeping this a little bit frozen is a great way to go when you're going to cut it. This is not rendered, so this is not a stable fat, and by that I mean that there are still chunks of meat in this, which is what the rendering process takes out. So you need to treat this as though it's a raw piece of meat, meaning that you want to keep this in the freezer or in the refrigerator, and if you keep it in the refrigerator, you'll want to use it within a few days. You'll also want to use the sanitation practices that you would use for raw meat. But that said, this is a great thing to cook with and is a wonderful addition to anything that you would cook that has a savory flavor, say like roasting vegetables, sauteing vegetables, anything like that. So today I am going to show you how I'm going to just saute up some onions with that. To start, you'll want to cut this into small chunks. And you see how easily that slices? That is because it is still frozen. It would be much harder to slice if you had this very soft. It would just mush. Okay, now remember, this is like using an equivalent amount of any sort of fat, like a butter or anything like that. So that's probably plenty for a pan full of onions. It just doesn't take that much. Now, we want to cut this into very, very small strips. The thinner the better, because essentially what we're going to be doing is rendering this down in the pan. So these are nice small chunks, kind of like maybe you would slice some rashers of bacon. All right, I'm going to go get my onion sliced and I'll be right back. So I have my onion chopped and ready to go. I have my fat back chopped and ready to go. And I am heating up a cast iron pan. Now, it's important to use a heavy bottom pan when you're cooking with fat back because you need to bring it up to temperature slowly to give it a chance to start to render before you put whatever you're cooking in it in. So I have my pan on low and I want to let it really kind of get to pretty warm. And then we can go ahead and drop these guys right on into our pan. Now, as these start to sizzle, I'm going to go ahead and move them around a little bit just to make sure they're getting a chance to kind of melt. Now, when you're cooking with fat back, you're going to have that fat, but then you're going to have the equivalent of the cracklings in there too. And what the cracklings are just the parts of the meat that are still left in the chunks of fat that we have here. And they're going to go ahead and cook right on up, and they're going to make a delicious addition to the savoriness of the onions. Now, this has not been smoked or salted, so this isn't quite like a bacon or a pancetta or anything like that. This is just the fat and the meat. So while it does have a little bit of a porky flavor, it's not going to have, say, the salty or the smoky flavor of a bacon. Now, this is starting to render out, and I have a nice layer all the way over the bottom of my pan of oil that has now rendered. Okay, now as soon as you have that nice layer of oil at the bottom, you can go ahead and put in whatever it is that you're going to cook. Now this is going to be delicious because not only does it have the onions that are then cooked in that pig fat, but it also leaves those little chunks of cracklings in there when you get it all done. Now you want to make sure that you have cooked it so that by the time your vegetables are done cooking all the way, your fatback has browned slightly and has finished rendering out. That way you don't want to get a bite of like a raw fat or anything like that. So you want to make sure that before you put those onions in, it's already starting to brown slightly. You can do something very similar for things that you would like to roast in the oven. You just start it on the stove top and stir it around until it has gone ahead and let go of most of that fat. And then you add, say, your meat or whatever it is that you want to put in your cast iron pan along with your fatback, and then get that into the oven to roast. This is a great way to use that pig fat before you ever even get around to rendering it. Enjoy, guys.